Big 12 is in shambles. It is about to lose its two biggest star teams, Texas and Oklahoma, and they are trying to get into the SEC. Sam, what is your reaction to this monstrously groundbreaking news? I mean, it is huge.
Do you know the song that goes money, 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 and it just yeah. They don't. Oh, here's my thing about this, right? If you're trying to get into the playoff, why? What are you doing? Like the SEC is an absolute doghouse, and I don't just say that. There's a bulldog in Georgia that'll wreck some of these teams. And
okay,
granted, I think
but to be fair, Bevo did try to stomp that dog. Bevo, if you don't know, the Longhorns' actual Longhorn mascot.
Well, respect. I guess the mascot could win. Too bad the football team can't. When it comes to that game, look, for one, Oklahoma could hold their own because I mean they're already a preseason top 5 team. Spencer Rattler's in his second year. He played a lot better down the stretch last year, and he's going to be good. Like I think he's going to be a Heisman candidate next year. Granted, I said that last year, and I didn't look the smartest, but I think he's going to develop into a legitimate top tier quarterback and probably be drafted either next year or the year after. When I look at this though, and again, I'm not the biggest college football brain out there, but you walking into a conference with Alabama, Georgia, Florida, which Florida's more of a sleeper this year, LSU another year developing, even though there are question marks at quarterback. And you're Texas, you haven't made the playoff out of the Big 12. And your only major competition in the Big 12 on a year-to-year basis is Oklahoma. You are going into a situation, if you're Texas especially, where you can't win, like besides getting a ton of money. And granted, right, that's why I say it's about money. When you're Oklahoma, yeah, it's definitely about money. It makes your life harder to get in the playoff and totally destroys the balance of college football. But you have a chance. Like Oklahoma's in a better spot to contend for the college football playoff this year than Texas and arguably Georgia, even though Georgia's defense is really, really good and they're figuring things out offensively pretty quickly. When you're Texas, though, I don't get why. I mean, I think they're probably just following Oklahoma because at this point, if they were to be the best in the Big 12, they'd feel like it means nothing because they'd be the really only big time competitor outside of Iowa State, maybe. But it's not the most sound decision from a competition standpoint, especially if you're Texas. And honestly, if you're Oklahoma, you put yourself in more jeopardy for sure.
I'm going to actually have to disagree. Okay, here's the thing.
If you think Texas can contend in that conference, I think at least this year, I think you're crazy. Yeah.
They're not even going to be in the SEC this year. They still have contracts.
Fair enough.
They're going to be out in 2025. That's when it happens.
Okay. So you think that
unless they somehow try to
that can compete?
Yeah. No, I don't. But here's the thing about the SEC. It is the best football conference there is.
I agree.
You put that label SEC on your team's name, you're going to get more people to come to your team.
I mean, I think Texas doesn't struggle for actual support for football anyway, but
sure, but they don't get the best, compared to like Georgia or Alabama.
True.
Florida even gets more 5 stars than Texas these days. You know what all of those have in common?
I know what you mean. SEC. Everyone wants to play there. Yeah.
Also, you get more money by joining the SEC. Okay, it is a cash cow.
And that's why I say it's about money, Joe.
Yeah. You're going to get better facilities. You're going to get more money to be able to pay coaches. You're going to get, hopefully, better coaches. You're going to get so many new perks by joining the SEC. Only downside from this is, it's going to be harder competition. But you're going to get the pull from having that SEC brand, and you're already one of the biggest brands in college football.
Yeah, fair. But that's where I disagree because when we look at this, Joe, for one, you already are one of the biggest brands in college football. And we've seen Oklahoma qualify for the playoff repeatedly out of the Big 12. And it's not like they haven't been competitive. They almost beat Georgia the year Baker was there, if it wasn't for kind of a choke job down the stretch. I don't think you can't win the playoff if you're not in the SEC. I mean, Clemson pretty much proved that. But my thing on this is I think they're prioritizing money over both, say, the competitive balance for themselves, especially Texas. Because I'm not convinced Texas will ever get to a level in the SEC where they'll be competing with Alabama. Even I think with Georgia, yeah, they'll get to that level if they're in the SEC. But Alabama, man, that's a whole different beast. And you're just setting yourself up to play them either in the SEC West and lose, or play them in the SEC championship game and lose. The other thing I have, though, and this is the bigger issue, and I maybe didn't touch on this clearly earlier, you're upsetting the entire balance of the sport because you're cheapening the Big 12 down the line, right? The Big 12 is a major power conference, and we've seen what happens with the ACC, right? Outside of Clemson, it's a joke. Like the Big 12, if Texas and Oklahoma, the two actual perennial programs, were to leave, could you imagine?
Big 12 is going to go away.
Yeah, and that would be my concern, because you would get 3 teams out of the SEC making the college football playoff every year.
Yeah, I mean, that happens most of the time anyway, though.
It happens with 2 sometimes. It never gets to 3.
2. It's Georgia and Alabama most of the time. And usually Florida can be up there, but they're going to try and go with someone from Oklahoma. They honestly want people from the SEC is honestly always going to get favored. That is why it is so hard to be able to win when you're not in a conference that isn't called the SEC.
Yeah, I agree.
You can go undefeated in the Pac-12. You think you're going to make the playoffs even if Oklahoma or not they're in the Big 12 still. If Georgia loses one game,
you might not get it, and that's the problem.
You're not going to get it,
and that's why I say okay. And this isn't just going to affect the Big 12, right? And the Big 12 is going to be done. Like you're never. Iowa State could go in. It would basically be a Group of 5 conference. But what I'm going to say about this, Joe, it's not just them. You throw Texas and Oklahoma into the SEC, and you look. Say Oregon goes undefeated in the Pac-12. I think Clemson's going to get in regardless. I don't think Clemson really is that affected by it because they'll go undefeated in the ACC and it'll be fine for them.
Until Dabo retires and they're not going to be that big of a team.
Yeah, exactly. But right now, Clemson's always going to compete, and Dabo's young enough where he's going to be coaching for a minute. When we look though at the Pac-12, say USC or Oregon goes undefeated, which by the way, there's already no margin for error for Pac-12 teams anyway because the conference is a lot harder. Say one of those teams goes undefeated, but then you have Alabama, say they're undefeated, 1 loss Georgia, and 1 loss Texas. And we're looking at it. You're going to get 3 SEC teams and then Clemson. And the Pac-12 team that went undefeated isn't going to get a second look. Whereas now, if somebody goes undefeated in the Pac-12, I mean, they could get in. We saw Washington get in the college football playoff. I don't even think they were undefeated. They might have 1 loss. So there's still potential for these small, I don't want to say smaller Power 5, but for lack of a better term, these Power 5 conferences that aren't the SEC or Clemson. But if you were to move Texas in there and Oklahoma in there, Joe, the argument's going to be, well, Georgia beat Oklahoma. Or Texas beat Georgia. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And this is where the problem lies because the strength of schedule is so heavy in the SEC. They, 1, won't have to schedule hard games out of conference, and 2, they'll get the benefit of the doubt because they play each other. And that's kind of where I have an issue with it. But I also get where you come from. If you're a program trying to move there, it helps you out a ton.
And honestly, the college football world is, whether you like it or not, it's come to shambles even before this.
True.
Okay. No one can agree on a college football playoff that works.
Facts.
We still have one of the worst systems for playoffs in, I think, the world. Okay. I mean, any sport has a better playoff structure than the college football playoffs.
True.
Okay. We just pick 4 teams. Let random people pick 4 teams. And honestly, 2 of the teams always make the playoffs no matter what. And that's Alabama and Clemson.
And part of that's because they're dominant as programs, right? But also there's no parity because they're 2 of the 4 teams every
year. Yeah. So we need to fix college football. And I don't care that Texas and Oklahoma are joining the SEC. even if it like people thought, Oklahoma was the team that wanted to go like originally and Texas wanted to stay. I don't see that as a case. I think they both wanted to go. They wanted to go in 2010. Missouri and Texas A&M got that over them. I don't know how. But you can't split up the Red River rivalry. Okay, that's never going to happen. Also, this is the perfect time to redo the playoff format.
Oh, 100. I mean, they're already trying to do that.
So we have, without them paying like the $70 million, exit fee to leave early. They say they're going to wait. They say they're fine with waiting. We have till 2025 to make it so that, 3 SEC teams making the playoffs isn't going to be that big of a problem.
Yeah. So you're saying that this needs to be accompanied with a playoff increase in size?
I think it needs to be.
It absolutely does. And that's the kind of argument I'm coming from. If you're for one, I think 4 teams is already unfair to power like group of 5 teams. Like Cincinnati got completely hosed. UCF got hosed when they went undefeated one year. Granted, obviously their resumes weren't good enough because they didn't have the opportunity to play anybody, but you could have argued they could have competed. But the thing about this is like the way as it currently is set, if they don't increase the format, and also if they increase the size, there's whole other issues with player health, what you're going to do with the regular season. There's a lot of a mess here. But if you don't, and you're left with a 4 team or even an 8 team, right? You could be getting 4 of those teams out of the SEC still. That's the thing. It's the competitive balance that bugs me, especially right now with the current setup. But I do agree with you. They would have to expand the playoff. But if they're going to do that, then you have to touch on the fact that these guys are already playing 15 games with a 14 playoff. So we would have to adjust something where they're playing less regular season games, or maybe you take a week out of the non-conference or something.
Yeah. I think you'd have to do that. I also think the Big Ten is a conference with 14 teams. I think we're going to see soon 2 teams wanting to join the Big Ten. And I think one of them might be Notre Dame eventually.
Yeah, well, I also heard Notre Dame, the ACC, because the ACC, the only real competition would be Clemson. And they could beat up on everybody else and look pretty good.
But yeah, so my thing is, if we get like 3 conferences to have like 16 teams, we can just switch up the format. So you got like the East region and the West region and the SEC right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's 7 teams each. You get 8 teams each. You can do that. I mean, or you could do like an NFL thing and do 4 teams in the division for each conference.
Yeah, I mean that could be interesting as well.
And then you play each of those teams, and then like the NFL, you play one other division in that conference, and then you go like to the playoffs, and before that, you also have like the out of conference games too. That would shorten the number of games played.
True.
Only problem is it would also destroy another conference, and that conference is the Pac-12.
Which, and that's the biggest thing, right? I mean, we talk about needing to protect group of 5 conferences, which, by the way, you could also fix it in a way with some group of 5 teams joining, say, the Pac-12 or the ACC to try to account for that. But then those group of 5 conferences are destroyed. So that's the biggest issue. There's no real winning with the way things are set up right now, especially if this happens. I think it's already kind of broken, but I think it does get a little more broken if this switch happens.
Yeah, I think all in all, I am going to have to support Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC.
Yeah, well, it's more competitive. It's better for their programs.
Yeah, you said it. The Big 12 is not competitive enough in football. And people are going to be – no one really cares about Big 12 football unless Texas and Oklahoma are playing. That's the thing. I mean, are you going to turn on a TCU Baylor game ever?
The one year I would have done it was 2019 when they were a top 10 team.
Yeah.
Or 2014.
You ever going to watch Kansas football?
Absolutely not. Yeah. Unless Baker Mayfield's in the game.
The thing I can see happening is that conference is saved only because it turns into like just a Big East situation,
Yeah.
Like it becomes pure basketball. You know, because
By the way, if Texas and Oklahoma leave them for football, what happens with them for basketball, right? Because Texas and Oklahoma are becoming two perennial Big 12 basketball teams, but they would be losing out on games against Kansas. Granted, they would be playing Kentucky and they'd be playing Alabama and Arkansas, but Alabama and Arkansas are more seasonal teams. Like, you're going to get a couple good seasons out of them, and then you're just going to have to see what happens. I have faith in Musselman and Nate Oates, but it's not like a legacy program like Kentucky or Kansas. So that'll be interesting as well. Big 12 basketball conference has always been solid. And they have Baylor and Kansas still. Right? You lose Texas and Oklahoma. Like, for basketball, it's in their best interest to maybe play in the Big 12.
But I mean, the problem